recently some stats were published that showed the number of times, the percentage rather, from big events in 2016 that a team winning both pistol rounds caused them to win a particular map. Now, this is something where it's certainly interesting. The patterns are something we want to look at. People will try and draw conclusions from it. But a concern that I had was that one of the lines of thought that some of the people went down when this was published was down this old cliche that that's because when you win the pistol round, you win 3 rounds total because you win the 2 rounds following, where in theory the enemy can be ecoing, and therefore you go up 3-0. So if you won 2 pistols, that's 6 rounds. Obviously, you only need to get to 16 to win the game, so you only need 10 more rounds than winning the pistol round effectively. Now, part of the issue with that, and I'm glad that further down in the thread on this, a fairly high up comment actually said what is one of the initial conclusions you should actually come to if you watch top level CS, that teams that would tend to win both pistol rounds tend to be the better team. And therefore that's also why they win the majority of the time after winning the pistol rounds. It's not necessarily about the rounds that you get afterwards. But part of the reason why I found that old cliche of the fact that you go up 3-0 when you're in the pistol round quite dangerous is because it's always brought up in actually a context whenever people talk about 1.6. Like if I talk now and complain about how I think some of the pistols in Counter-Strike Global Offensive are overpowered, people will be like, yeah, but I don't want it like 1.6 where you just got all these free rounds and you couldn't win ecos. Like that's already a bullshit myth that I want to dispel. So the idea that in CSGO it exists, I already think's a very dangerous thing because people currently still think there's this hard 3-0 that there absolutely is not. And the problem is, if we allow people to think that, then it's going to make it even more difficult to ever have a reasonable discussion, as I'm going to now, about how overpowered force buys can be and about how dangerous that is for the way it affects the economy. So first of all, even in CSGO, those 3-0 leads don't really exist in general when we're talking about competitive level CS, not against scrubs in matchmaking. Now, first and foremost, most teams, when they lose the pistol round, at top level pros, force buy anyway, or they do low econ buy, then a force buy. When they do that, elite level teams, an amazing amount of the time, break back the opponent on the second or the third round. So these easy, safe 3-0 leads do not exist for those levels of teams. And even if they don't break them back and win the round outright and reset the economy of the other team, they're in a situation where they at least do enough economical damage that team's rebuying weapons, rebuying utility, etc. And as a result, you get to a round where the T's can actually have an advantage. Or this, well, it depends on the scenario, obviously. You can have this big impact on the game, even though on the scoreboard it doesn't show up in the same way. Also, especially when we're talking about economical damage, you have to separate out the sides here. It matters much more whether you're T or CT. People doing force buys on the T side can do economical damage to CTs. That's way more damaging. If you win the round against the TTs on your force buys, when they won the pistol round and they were the ones building up the economy, now their economy needs to be bigger than the T economy as a general rule because their weapons are more expensive. Their utility is more expensive as well. I mean, the incendiary grenade costs more than the Molotov. I've never understood that personally. When you consider that Valve wants to make the game, I mean, I suppose in theory, we all know the underlying flaw with CSGO is because the game's been biased to CTs in so many senses. They're trying to figure out everything they can to make the Ts more powerful. But whatever, ignoring that for a moment, the CTs need more economy anyway, so it's even more dangerous for them if they get broken back. Then add in that the Ts choose where to go on the map, so they can have a lower econ buy, and they can choose where to pinpoint that to, where CTs, if they do a force buy, are just gambling that the Ts come near them and actually allow them a chance to use these weapons, these pistols, and close-up positions, for example. So it's way more devastating what it can happen from the T side in this particular sense. And we know at the moment that if Ts do really big economical damage, get the bomb down, but lose the round, they can be in a scenario where their economy's boosted right up anyway, and the CTs are right on the brink of dying, even though they've won all the rounds because of what's happened economically to them. So a key detail is that it's not even just about winning the round, which is what the 3-0 stat would show or what the pistol round stat would seem to show. I mean, as a side note, this is something that deserves its own video, really. This is one of the reasons why actually on the CT side we have a concept that's fucking the game, which is the UMPs. Because we see teams like SK where sometimes on the third round they're just going for full UMPs, knowing that they have a chance even against full AK buys, force buys by the enemy, and if they only lose a couple of people in this scenario, and you're going to have to do massive damage to them, basically, to stop them being able to still have this strong economy, even if you win the round against them. That's what's so dangerous about it. Now, a point I want to make is, because this is a lot of the suggestions we have go more towards a 1.6 world where you don't have an incredibly overpowered $500 pistol that can just break you open into the game, give you a gun, win you the round back in the way it can in CSGO. So in 1.6, people say the same thing, right? They say the same thing. They say, oh, you win the pistol, you automatically go up 3-0. That is a myth. And even when it existed, was vastly exaggerated. So 1.6, at a reasonable competitive level, existed from 2000 to 2012. So around 12 years. Now, in those 12 years, the era where you almost were guaranteed 3 rounds if you won the pistol round is realistically the first 3 to 4 years, 2000 to 2003. And that's because back then, you only had the MP5 as the weapon that you go to as the CT when you win the pistol round, or the T, and you want a weapon next. You don't go for the AK, you can't get that yet in general. And you go to the MP5 and armor, and that's what you use to mop up the eco frags. And actually, it was a very good weapon against ecos back then. And so, as a result, and people weren't as good with the pistols like the Deagle, etc. Obviously, that skill increased over time. So as a result, that's what you do, and you do mop up, and you do go 3-0 up 99% of the time. Now, with that said, that's an exaggeration, the 99%, obviously. When you get to about 2005, 2006, so we're only talking about halfway through the lifespan of competitive 1.6, now you get to a scenario where the actual meta game, especially for European teams, was on CT side, you would actually go straight from pistol round, if you won it, depending on your money, to a risky full cult buy on 1 or 2 players at least. At the elite level teams, the SKs, Fanatics of the world, just go all 5 cults sometimes. Now, in this world, that makes you, yes, much more likely to win that round in some senses, because you're going to be facing weapons that usually won't be an AK on the enemy side, but you've got a full cult, therefore you'll decimate it. But it also, interestingly enough, meant that when you played a team that was amazing with Desert Eagles or could coordinate a low econ buy rush, if they got your cult, they now have a much better chance of turning the whole round in their favor in a way that they wouldn't have before if they kill you and get an MP5 or a FAMAS or whatever else it might be. So that in itself disrupted the whole 3-0 up aspect, and you didn't see that happen as often, especially against, as I say, teams that were very good with Deagles, for example. Then you got the world where, and by the way, for anyone wondering, another reason why you had to do the risky cult buy is because eventually terrorists started gambling with AK no armor buys or AK no head armor buys, and thinking to themselves, right, well, we're just going to give the AK to our better player, let him the win around and him break the game up, and then we get their guns, and then we have guns. So that's another concept that I always bring up when we're talking about weapons, is that in the competitive game, it's not just about one weapon versus another. It's like, what happens then? Okay, I kill this weapon, I get that weapon, give it to my teammate. If that's a scenario that can occur a lot, now it's very dangerous. That's why Tech9 buys are very dangerous in CSGO. You do it onto the small site, you give up a few of your guys to die, but then everyone who's alive gets weapons. There's a problem right there. It's not just a Tech9 versus a Colt. It's a Tech9 versus Colts, and then Colts onto his team. That's the swing right there that the developers don't take into account. So then you had the era, 2005, 2006 going onwards, where teams started abusing, especially Eastern European teams, this is why it's called this, the Russian buy. So what happens is you buy one AK, maybe a Galil, a bunch of Deagles, and you have the AK either going first or second, sometimes second if you want like the Deagle to run out and draw the enemy's fire, and then the AK step out and take him out one-on-one and trade him, or the AK goes first. And the idea is you walk an AK and a Galil up the map as terrorists, because you can choose where to go and where your teammates are, and then if the AK dies, the guy behind him picks it up. So suddenly one AK or 2 AKs could be used by a whole team, obviously not a 5-on-5, at different intervals, and you can get much more use out of that one gun than you could in terms of at the beginning of the round you're buying one gun, where it's not one gun against 5 guns in terms of rifles. You see the way it was different, and that changed the economy, because teams like Eastern European teams particularly, and obviously the best of them, so we're talking about the Poles, Neo and Taz's teams, Pentagram, MYM, ESC, FX, these are all different names for it. Then Navi, obviously. These teams that won major championships won it by using and abusing this aspect of a metagame. Now, it wasn't used as much by the European teams, depending on how skilled your players were, but in general, this became a key concept that also meant that people could win the third round against you, and you were only 2-0 up after winning a flawless CT pistol round. Now, the reason why also this is key is because force buys in CSGO, in my opinion, really they have a lot of misconceptions about them, and in my opinion, really fuck the economical aspect, because it's become the case that after watching enough CSGO, it actually feels like at the moment, especially with like the Tech9, etc., and the UMP, force buys actually might even be the right approach, to gamble on a couple of rounds as opposed to save 2 rounds for that full buy on the fourth. It depends what type of team you are and what strategy you have, obviously. But this descent into hell is because since everyone does it, in a sense, mixing it up in that meta game yourself, yeah, you're gambling as well, but so is everyone else. And so to some degree, there's a lot of times when it probably is the right approach. I mean, at the moment, North is trying to pioneer a full old school approach of saving. And it works sometimes, but sometimes you see where it feels like economically it doesn't make as much sense, especially in terms of not being able to do economical damage to the CTs, which I hope Yanko actually soon will make a video about, because he's exactly the guy who could tell you about that and give you some really good examples from tournaments of it. I mean, I actually think this aspect of not being willing to engage in the force buys because they are bullshit in terms of they're not pure Counter-Strike that we think of. That's actually one of the things I think held back NIP so much in 2015, because this is the era when everyone who was good was doing it to some extent. And NIP tried to say, oh, these weapons are overpowered and just cry and not do it as much. I mean, they weren't as good at doing it either because their players weren't as good. And this is one of the issues that cost them a lot and made it so they couldn't mix it up as well. And that's why I always thought one of the issues, there's many others as well, as to why the LDLC Envious teams were always a hard counter to NIP, because they could break them back in this fashion. You got to add in that it's a mixture of problems here. It's not just the power of these pistols, it's the cost of them as well. I mean, it makes it so that actually you can have one that's not even technically a force buy, it's just a low econ buy, and you can have a legit chance to do something. That makes it not even such a big gamble. Where's the punishment if you fail? It's barely even a force buy. So one of my issues is I would actually change both the power and the cost of both those weapons, the CZ and the Tech 9. Particularly low, the Tech 9, because at least the CZ is a positional weapon. If you're CT, you have to position yourself really close range, try to catch the guy off guard if possible so you can get your full clip off, not just get killed on the first or second bullet, which is obviously going to be hard to aim. And to some degree, you have to hope the terrorist comes to your position. You don't have as much say in it. The problem is, and by the way, as a result, I'm actually surprised so many teams do lose to CZ buys, because if I'm a terrorist team and I send my early guy into probe and he gets killed, first of all, I might go and send multiple people to get that weapon back. Secondly, once I've got the weapon back, I might just guard the weapon and make sure someone goes for it and then kill them then. Or I'm just going to pull back entirely, reset the round, go somewhere else and try and probe and find the area with the least CZs and the least of those weapons and then take over in that way. Too many teams think, right, well, we've got AKs and he's got the CZ. Let's just get him. He's no help. We know where he's like. That aspect to me, people also play into the gamble of the CZ. So I think the CZ being overpowered isn't as bad as it seems overall. Now, with that said, it's the Tech 9 that really ruins the force buys. Because first of all, terrorists are already more apt to do force buys as it is. Because as I've explained, CT economy has to be protected more, built up, maintained, and you can't force buy as much and make it as effective on the CT side. So it's mainly T side force buys that have always been ruining the game, in my opinion. Now the big problem is the Tech 9. It's so cheap and it's so powerful still from medium range. Now, terrorists can nearly always choose to attack from medium range. There's very few positions the CT can force themselves to be able to cover the site, but also be at long range. So by being in medium to close range, they've already got rid of the whole damage drop-off thing, which was the nerf to the Tech 9, which never existed, by the way. Who the fuck was ever abusing it long range in proper pro games? The problem with the Tech 9 is that it ruins CT economies because it's the best, it's used best, most effectively while you're running. So you're running, which makes it harder for the CT to kill you. The CT's probably got a rifle, which means in general, he wants to stay roughly stationary. So he's a stationary target. You're moving. There's already kind of a neutralizing effect there. Secondly, you have multiple people with Tech 9s, ideally shooting at one guy with a rifle. He can't necessarily shoot all the people at once because you can't spray down like you can in 1.6. It's not as effective, the spray transfer, and you just don't kill people all in one row in the same way you did at Arch on CT on Inferno in 1.6. So this is a big problem in terms of the massive impact it's having and why even pro-level teams do it, as to why an Astralis will do a move like a Tech 9 Rush in order to win a major. This is still a prevalent problem in CSGO. So my problem is force buys aren't polished enough. The weapons aren't expensive enough. I want it to be more expensive. Like I would take a Tech 9. I'd make a Tech 9 $850. Try that then. Because then when people do it and it doesn't work, they get so economically fucked, they have to at least think about it. Now it becomes more than just a super low econ buy. Now they can have one less grenade if they want to do it and make it a low econ buy. There's ways that you're balancing the game more here. Yes, they're still going to win some of those Tech 9 rounds and turn the game around, but I'm trying to even it up more, and I'm trying to make a world in which you can save more, and sometimes that's the correct decision, which doesn't as much exist right now. So force buys aren't punished enough. Winning T force buys punishes CTs too much. I mean, that's why I want the Tech 9 to be more expensive and less powerful, slightly less powerful, because you still get the effect of multiple people shooting the guy, and you can get the kills, just not going to get so many ridiculous ones where it just spins the game completely. And I would make the CZ, I wouldn't affect the power of that. I would just make it more expensive. I'd make the CZ like $700 or something. So at least now if the CT does it and he gambles and I don't come in that position, he's wasted extra money. He hasn't got anything out of it. And maybe he gets killed from long range. I think that's a fairer way to do it. Tech 9, less powerful. So I actually think this is one of the flaws with thinking about low econ and force buy aspects, is that competitively the context isn't one-on-one, or it isn't that you win this round and then you go to this aspect here. You have to understand how it affects. The key concept is to tie the economical context into the metagame context of how the competitive game is played and what decisions people make countering and in reaction to each other. Because that's where low econ and force buy aspects have misconceptions and, in my opinion, are still quite fucked.